The grand ballroom of Hartwell Manor blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic rainbows across silk gowns and polished marble floors. The cream of Velminster society had gathered for the midsummer ball, that most anticipated event of the season where fortunes were made, alliances forged, and futures decided in the space between one waltz and the next. Lady Corisande Ashworth watched it all from the shadows of a recessed alcove on the upper gallery, partially concealed by heavy velvet drapes, the color of midnight. From here, she could observe the glittering spectacle below without being observed herself, which was precisely how her parents preferred it. At 23, Corisande had perfected the art of invisibility, not by choice, but by necessity. Her honey-brown hair and striking amber eyes might have drawn attention in another life. Her quick mind and sharper wit might have made her a sought-after conversationalist. But none of that mattered, not when she walked with the slight but unmistakable limp that had marked her since birth. A turned foot, the physicians had called it, a minor imperfection, easily managed with specially constructed shoes and years of careful practice. To Corisande, it was simply part of who she was, no more defining than the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. To her parents, it was an unforgivable defect. She shifted her weight carefully, easing the familiar ache in her left ankle after standing too long, and continued watching the dancers below. Her younger sister Perpetua was down there somewhere, golden-haired and graceful, being paraded before every eligible gentleman like a prized mare at auction. Perpetua, the perfect daughter, the one worth investing in. Corisande felt no bitterness toward her sister. Perpetua was genuinely sweet-natured, if somewhat empty-headed, and had never treated Corisande with anything but kindness. The cruelty came entirely from their parents, Lord Percival and Lady Dorothea Ashworth, who had made it abundantly clear since Corisande's childhood that she was a disappointment best kept hidden. Absolutely mortifying that she insisted on coming at all. Corisande froze. Her mother's voice, sharp and carrying, drifted up from somewhere just below the gallery. She pressed deeper into the alcove, heart pounding. "I told Percival we should have left her at Ashworth with a companion," Lady Dorothea continued, "but he worried about appearances. What would people say if the eldest daughter never attended any functions whatsoever?" Quite right," another woman's voice agreed. Lady Rowntree, if Corisande wasn't mistaken, one of her mother's closest confidants and most reliable gossips. "Though I must say, Dorothea, you've managed the situation admirably. I hardly noticed her at all this evening. That's the idea. She's been instructed to stay upstairs, out of sight. The last thing we need is some gentleman taking pity on her and asking for a dance. Can you imagine the spectacle? The poor girl can barely walk straight, let alone waltz." Corisande's cheeks burned with humiliation, though she'd heard variations of this speech her entire life. The words still cut, sharp as broken glass. "Such a pity," Lady Rowntree clucked sympathetically. "She has a pleasant enough face. If not for the deficiency, she might have made an acceptable match." "Pleasant faces don't compensate for damaged goods," Lady Dorothea said crisply. "We've accepted the reality of the situation. Corisande will never marry. The best we can hope for is that Perpetua makes a brilliant match and can afford to keep her spinster sister in some quiet cottage somewhere. Out of sight, out of mind. At least she's not bitter about it. Some girls in her position become quite difficult. Oh, Corisande knows her place. We made certain of that years ago. She understands that drawing attention to herself only brings shame upon the family. Better for everyone if she simply fades into the background." Their voices moved away, swallowed by the music and chatter of the ball below, but Corisande remained frozen in her alcove. Her hands trembled, her eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. 23 years of this. 23 years of being told she was broken, shameful, unworthy of love or happiness, or even basic consideration. And the worst part, the truly devastating part, was that some small, wounded piece of her had begun to believe it. She took a shaky breath and straightened her spine. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction, even if they never knew about it. That, said a crisp, aristocratic voice from the shadows behind her, was the most appalling display of maternal cruelty I have witnessed in 7 decades of observing humanity's worst behavior. Corisande spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A woman emerged from the deeper shadows of the gallery, where another alcove was concealed by matching drapes. She was perhaps 70 years of age, dressed in magnificent silver silk that caught the candlelight like moonbeams on water. Her white hair was arranged in an elaborate style adorned with sapphires, and her posture spoke of absolute authority, the kind that came from generations of breeding and a lifetime of being obeyed. But it was her eyes that captured Corisande's attention. Sharp, intelligent, and filled with something that looked remarkably like calculation. "I beg your pardon," Corisande said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I didn't realize anyone else was up here." "Clearly neither did your charming mother." The woman moved closer, studying Corisande with unnerving intensity. "Lady Corisande Ashworth, I presume. The disappointing eldest daughter with the unfortunate foot." The bluntness should have been offensive. Instead, it was almost refreshing after years of whispered pity and averted gazes. "You have me at a disadvantage, madam. You know my name, but I don't know yours." The woman smiled, a slow, satisfied expression that made Corisande think of a cat who had just spotted a particularly interesting mouse. "I am Sophronia Beckworth, Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, and I have a proposition for you that is going to sound utterly insane." Corisande stared at the Dowager Duchess, certain she must have misheard. The Duchess of Thornfield was one of the most powerful women in the kingdom, a legendary figure whose influence extended from the highest courts to the most exclusive drawing rooms. What could such a woman possibly want with her? "Your Grace," Corisande said carefully, "I'm honored by your attention, but I cannot imagine what proposition you could have for someone like me." "Someone like you," the Dowager Duchess repeated thoughtfully. "You mean someone intelligent, observant, and clearly possessed of considerable inner strength? Or someone your appalling parents have convinced the world is worthless because she walks with a slight limp?" The directness left Corisande momentarily speechless. "I've been watching you for the past hour," Sophronia continued, settling onto a small bench as if she owned the gallery, which, given her status, she might as well have. "You've been cataloging everyone below. I saw your eyes track Lady Pemberton when she slipped away with Lord Ashcroft. Definitely not her husband. You noticed when young Mr. Fairfax pocketed a silver snuff-box from the display cabinet. And you've been silently mouthing the steps to every dance, perfectly in time, despite your mother's charming assertion that you can barely walk." Corisande felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I wasn't aware I was being observed. Few people are. That's rather the point of observation, isn't it?" Sophronia's eyes glittered. "You're wasted in that alcove, girl. Wasted being hidden away by people too stupid to recognize your value. Which brings me to my proposition." She paused, clearly enjoying Corisande's visible confusion. "I have a grandson, Theron Beckworth, the current Duke of Thornfield. 31 years old, disgustingly wealthy, reasonably handsome if you appreciate the brooding type, and absolutely determined to remain unmarried despite my best efforts over the past decade. Do you know how many eligible ladies I've paraded before him?" "I couldn't guess, Your Grace. Dozens. Beautiful, accomplished, impeccably bred young women from the finest families in England. He treats them all with perfect civility and complete indifference. He says they bore him. He claims they only see his title and his fortune, never him. Sophronia's tone suggested she found this entirely unreasonable. He's developed quite a talent for sending them running within minutes of introduction. Some kind of intimidation technique he's perfected. Coruscant frowned slightly. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but I still don't understand what this has to do with me. I need someone who won't run, someone who won't simper or fawn or pretend to be something she's not. Someone," Sophronia leaned forward, her gaze piercing, "who has faced real adversity and developed actual character because of it. Someone whose spirit hasn't been crushed despite years of appalling treatment from people who should have loved her unconditionally." The words hit Coruscant like physical blows, each one striking something tender and bruised inside her. "You want me to... what? Court your grandson? I want you to marry him." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Coruscant gripped the edge of the alcove's window frame for balance. "That's impossible. You heard my mother. I'm not fit for marriage. Certainly not to a duke." "I heard your mother spouting poisonous nonsense," Sophronia corrected sharply. "I heard a shallow, status-obsessed woman declare her own child defective because of a minor physical variation that has absolutely no bearing on her worth as a person or a potential wife. Your limp doesn't prevent you from thinking, does it? From conversing intelligently? From managing a household, or bearing children, or being a companion to someone? No, but then it's irrelevant. What matters is character, and from what I've observed tonight, you have more character than every simpering debutante in that ballroom combined." Coruscant shook her head slowly. "Your Grace, even if I were willing to entertain this madness, your grandson would never agree. You said yourself he's rejected dozens of women. Why would he accept me, of all people?" "Because you're going to be presented to him in a way he cannot refuse." Sophronia smiled again, that calculating expression that made Coruscant distinctly nervous. "And because I'm prepared to make it worth your while." "Worth my while how?" "Independence. Freedom. An escape from that prison your parents call a home." The Dowager Duchess's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "I saw your face while your mother was speaking, Lady Coruscant. I saw the pain you've learned to hide behind that composed mask. I'm offering you a chance at a completely different life. A life where you're valued rather than hidden. Where your intelligence is appreciated rather than suppressed. Where you're a duchess, not a shameful secret." It was everything Coruscant had never allowed herself to want, dangled before her like an impossible dream. "And if your grandson refuses? If he sees what everyone else sees when they look at me?" Sophronia rose from the bench, her silk gown whispering against the marble floor. "Then Theron is a fool, and I've greatly misjudged his character. But I don't think I have." She extended her hand. "Come with me, Lady Coruscant. Your life is about to change." Before Coruscant could formulate a response, before she could list all the reasons this was madness, Sophronia had taken her arm with surprising strength and was guiding her toward the gallery stairs. "Your Grace, wait. I haven't agreed to anything. You haven't refused either." Sophronia's pace didn't slow. "And in my experience, hesitation means the heart wants what the head is afraid to accept. My parents will be handled. Trust me, child. I've been managing difficult people since before your parents were born." They descended the stairs into the crowded ballroom, and Coruscant felt every eye turning toward them. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield was not a woman who went unnoticed, and her companion, the hidden Ashworth daughter with the unfortunate foot, was equally impossible to ignore. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Coruscant saw her mother's face across the room, the color draining from Lady Dorothea's cheeks as she registered what was happening. Her father stood nearby, his expression cycling through confusion, alarm, and barely concealed fury. "Your Grace," Corisanda hissed. "Everyone is staring." "That's rather the point, dear. Now straighten your spine and lift your chin. You're about to be introduced to your future husband." They moved through the crowd, which parted before Sophronia like the sea, before a particularly determined ship. Corisanda focused on walking steadily, refusing to let her limp show more than absolutely necessary, though she suspected the Dowager Duchess would scold her for hiding it. They stopped before a group of gentlemen near the terrace doors, and there, standing slightly apart from the others, with a glass of whiskey he clearly wished were larger, was a man who could only be the Duke of Thornfield. Theron Beckworth was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a jaw that suggested stubbornness as an inherent character trait. His eyes were a deep gray, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, and they were currently fixed on his grandmother with an expression of extreme wariness. "Grandmother," he said, his voice a low baritone that carried clearly despite the surrounding noise. "What are you doing?" "Making introductions, darling. This is Lady Corisand Ashworth. Lady Corisand, my grandson, Theron Beckworth, Duke of Thornfield." Those gray eyes shifted to Corisanda, assessing her with unsettling intensity. She forced herself to meet his gaze directly, refusing to look away, or flush, or fidget, like the simpering debutantes he apparently despised. "Lady Corisanda," he said after a long moment, "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't, Your Grace. I'm generally kept hidden at social functions. Apparently, I'm too defective to be seen in public." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, a defense mechanism born of years of humiliation. She saw surprise flicker across his features, followed by something that might have been interest. "Defective," he repeated. "How so?" Before Corisanda could answer, Sophronia's voice rang out across the ballroom with a volume and authority that silenced every conversation within hearing distance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a most delightful announcement. My grandson, the Duke of Thornfield, has finally made his choice. May I present Lady Corisanda Ashworth, who has graciously consented to become his bride. The wedding will take place in 2 months' time at Thornfield Cathedral." The silence that followed was absolute. Corisanda felt the blood drain from her face. "Your Grace," she breathed. "I never consented." "Details," Sophronia murmured. "Look at Theron." Against her better judgment, Corisanda looked. The Duke's expression had transformed from wariness to something far more complex. Surprise, certainly, but also a calculating gleam that mirrored his grandmother's. His gaze moved from Sophronia to Corisanda to the gathered crowd, processing the situation with visible speed. Then he did something entirely unexpected. He smiled, a slow, deliberate expression that didn't quite reach his eyes, and took Corisanda's hand in his. "Grandmother has always had a talent for dramatic announcements," he said, his voice pitched to Carrie. "But in this case, she speaks true. Lady Corisanda has indeed done me the honor of accepting my proposal, though I had hoped to share the news more privately." The ballroom erupted. Voices surged around them. Congratulations and questions, and thinly veiled shock blending into incomprehensible cacophony. Through it all, Corisand stood motionless, her hand trapped in the Duke's firm grip, acutely aware that she had somehow just become engaged to a man she'd met 30 seconds ago. Across the room, she caught sight of her parents. Her father's face had gone purple with suppressed rage. Her mother looked like she might faint. "What are you doing?" Corisanda whispered urgently to the Duke. "Why didn't you deny it?" Theron leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Because my grandmother is a menace who clearly knows something I don't, and because the look on your parents' faces right now is the most entertaining thing I've witnessed in years." His gray eyes met hers, sharp with intelligence and something darker, more intriguing. "We'll discuss the actual terms of this arrangement later, Lady Coruscant. For now, smile as if you're not contemplating murder. We have an audience to convince." She was trapped, completely, irrevocably trapped. And somewhere beneath the panic and outrage, a small, defiant part of her felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The remainder of the ball passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical responses. Coruscant answered the same questions dozens of times, inventing details about a courtship that had never happened, while Theron stood beside her, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back, in a gesture that appeared possessive, but felt more like steering. Her parents never approached. She caught glimpses of them through the crowd, her mother's face frozen in a rictus of social pleasantry, her father drinking far more than was wise. They would have words later, she knew. Harsh, cutting words delivered in private, where no one could witness the Ashworth family's true nature. But that confrontation would have to wait. First, she had another to survive. At midnight, Sophronia declared the evening concluded and swept both Coruscant and Theron into her waiting carriage before anyone could protest. The vehicle had barely begun moving when Theron turned to his grandmother with barely controlled fury. "Explain. Now." Sophronia arranged her silk skirts with maddening calm. "I saw an opportunity and seized it. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you? You just announced my engagement to a woman I'd never met, in front of 200 witnesses, without consulting me. If I'd consulted you, you would have refused. Yes, because it's insane." Coruscant sat rigidly in the corner of the carriage, watching this exchange with growing alarm. "Perhaps," she interjected, "we could simply tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, a joke that went too far." Both Beckworths turned to look at her. "Impossible," Sophronia said. "The announcement has been made. Retracting it would create a scandal that would damage us all, but especially you, Lady Coruscant. The whispers would follow you forever. The damaged girl who tried to trap a duke and failed. But I didn't try to trap anyone. You did this. The world won't see it that way." Sophronia's voice softened slightly. "I know this seems drastic, child, but I watched you tonight, hiding in that alcove, while your mother declared you worthless. I watched you hold yourself together, with dignity and grace, despite being told you're not fit for human company. You deserve better than the life your parents have planned for you, which is no life at all. So your solution is to force me into marriage with a man who clearly doesn't want me? I don't know you," Theron cut in. His gray eyes studied her with that unsettling intensity. "That's rather different from not wanting you." Coruscant met his gaze. "Then let me enlighten you, Your Grace. I am Coruscant Ashworth, eldest daughter of Viscount Ashworth. I have a twisted foot that causes me to limp, which my parents consider so shameful that they've hidden me away for 23 years. I have no fortune, no connections, and apparently no value whatsoever except as a burden to be managed. There. Now you know me. Still interested?" The carriage fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, Theron laughed. It was a genuine sound, rough and startled, as if dragged from somewhere he didn't often access. "You have a sharper tongue than any debutante I've ever met. Debutantes are trained to be pleasant. I was trained to be invisible. It breeds a certain directness. I'm beginning to see that." He leaned back against the carriage seat, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "My grandmother, for all her meddling, isn't entirely wrong about one thing. I've spent a decade fending off women who see only my title and my fortune. They simper and agree with everything I say, and bore me within minutes. You've argued with me, insulted yourself with brutal honesty, and looked at me like you'd happily push me from this moving carriage. It's oddly refreshing. That's a low bar for refreshment, Your Grace. Call me Theron. If we're supposedly engaged, formality seems ridiculous. He glanced at his grandmother. How long? 2 months until the wedding, as I announced, though we could extend the engagement if needed. And what does Lady Coruscant receive from this arrangement, beyond the dubious pleasure of my company? Sophronia smiled. Freedom. Security. A position in society that her parents can never take from her. And, she added, looking at Coruscant, I'm prepared to settle a substantial sum on her family's estate, enough to ensure her younger sister's future regardless of what happens. Coruscant felt her chest tighten. Perpetua? Your sister deserves better than being sold to the highest bidder because your parents squandered their fortune trying to keep up appearances. Marry Theron, and I'll ensure she has options. It was masterful manipulation, and they all knew it. Sophronia had found the one thing Coruscant couldn't refuse. Theron watched her face, reading the struggle there. So we're both trapped, he observed quietly. Grandmother has outmaneuvered us completely. It appears so. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of shared circumstances, the beginning of an alliance, however reluctant. Then I suppose, Theron said slowly, we should discuss terms. Thornfield House in London was a monument to generations of wealth and power. Coruscant stood in the entrance hall 3 days later, her single trunk of belongings looking pathetically small against the grandeur of marble columns and gilded frames. Sophronia had arranged everything with military precision. Coruscant was to live at Thornfield House, as Theron's intended, properly chaperoned by the Dowager Duchess herself. Her parents had protested loudly and viciously in private, but they couldn't refuse without creating exactly the kind of scandal they'd spent years avoiding. Your parents signed the settlement papers this morning, Sophronia informed her, as a footman carried her trunk upstairs. They were remarkably eager once they understood the financial implications. They would be, Coruscant said bitterly. Money is the only language they speak. Then let them choke on their silence while you build a new life. Sophronia patted her arm. Come, I'll show you to your rooms. The suite prepared for her was larger than the entire upper floor of Ashworth Manor. Coruscant moved through it in a daze, touching silk curtains and polished furniture as if they might vanish. The modiste will arrive tomorrow for your new wardrobe, Sophronia continued. You'll need appropriate gowns for your new station, and we must discuss your schedule. Teas, dinners, the opera. You and Theron must be seen together regularly. Where is Theron? Coruscant asked. She hadn't seen him since that night in the carriage. Managing estate business, I believe. Or hiding in his study avoiding this situation. Possibly both. Sophronia's tone was dry. He'll come around. My grandson is stubborn, but he's not stupid. He'll recognize your worth eventually. And if he doesn't, then we'll have 2 months to change his mind, won't we? The Dowager Duchess moved toward the door. Dinner is at 7. Theron will join us. Try not to murder each other before dessert. Left alone, Coruscant sank onto the edge of the enormous bed and tried to breathe. 3 days ago, she'd been hiding behind curtains, listening to her mother call her damaged goods. Now she was living in a duke's house, wearing a sapphire engagement ring that felt like a shackle on her finger. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The door opened to reveal a young maid with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Lady Coruscant, I'm Dinah. I've been assigned as your lady's maid. Is there anything you need? Coruscant looked at her, this stranger who would see her most vulnerable moments, help her dress, witness her limp without the concealment of careful positioning. Honesty, she said finally. Can you give me that, Dinah? Tell me what the staff really thinks of this situation. Dinah hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. They think the Dowager Duchess has finally lost her mind, my lady. But they also think," she paused, "they think it's about time someone shook things up around here. His Grace has been unhappy for years. Maybe you're exactly what he needs." It wasn't reassurance, exactly, but it was something. Their first public appearance as an engaged couple came a week later at the Harrington Ball, one of the season's most anticipated events. Corisanda descended Thornfield House's grand staircase in a gown of deep burgundy silk, the color bold, chosen deliberately, a refusal to fade into the background. Theron waited at the bottom, immaculate in black evening clothes. His expression shifted as he watched her approach, something flickering in those gray eyes that she couldn't quite identify. "You're limping less than usual," he observed. "I'm limping exactly as much as usual. I'm simply not hiding it." She reached the bottom step and lifted her chin. "Your grandmother suggested I stop trying to conceal what everyone already knows. Grandmother dispenses wisdom like others breathe air, constantly, and whether requested or not." But his tone held grudging affection. He offered his arm. "Shall we face the wolves together?" The Harrington ballroom fell into whispered chaos when they entered. Corisanda felt hundreds of eyes cataloging every detail. Her gown, her limp, the way Theron's hand covered hers on his arm. She kept her spine straight and her expression serene, channeling years of practice at enduring scrutiny. They'd barely made it 10 feet when Lady Millicent Graves descended, a predatory beauty in pale pink who looked at Corisanda like something unpleasant discovered on her shoe. "Your Grace, what a surprise to see you here with your intended." The pause before the last word dripped with skepticism. "We've all been simply dying to meet the mysterious woman who finally captured your attention. Lady Millicent." Theron's voice could have frozen the Thames. "How delightful." "Lady Corisanda, isn't it?" Millicent's smile sharpened. "I don't believe we've met. But then, I understand you don't attend many functions. Health reasons, I heard." The implication was clear and cutting. Corisanda felt Theron stiffen beside her. "Not health reasons," Corisanda replied calmly. "Simply selective ones. I prefer to spend my time with people worth knowing. It does limit one's social calendar considerably." Millicent's smile faltered. "Lady Corisanda is an accomplished scholar of philosophy," Theron added smoothly. "She finds most social gatherings intellectually unstimulating. I can hardly blame her." "Philosophy?" Millicent's laugh was brittle. "How unusual for a lady." "Yes, I find unusual suits me better than ordinary." Corisanda met the woman's gaze directly. "Ordinary is so terribly tedious, don't you think?" For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Then Millicent's composure cracked, just slightly, and she excused herself with transparent haste. Theron steered Corisanda toward the refreshment table, his hand warm at her back. "That was impressive," he murmured. "Lady Millicent has sent 3 potential brides running in tears with that routine." "I've survived worse than society cats. My mother could teach her lessons in cruelty." "I'm beginning to believe it." He handed her a glass of champagne, his fingers brushing hers. "You didn't flinch. Not once. Even when she implied you were an invalid." "I've had 23 years of practice at not flinching." Corisanda sipped her champagne, watching the crowd over the rim of her glass. "Though I admit, having an ally helps. Is that what we are? Allies? What else would we be?" He was silent for a moment, studying her with that penetrating gaze. "I'm not sure yet. But I'm beginning to think this arrangement might be more interesting than I anticipated." Something warm flickered in Corisanda's chest, a feeling she quickly suppressed. "We should be careful," she said quietly. "People are watching. They're looking for cracks in the facade. Then we won't give them any." Theron set down his glass and extended his hand. Dance with me. Corasanda's heart stuttered. I can't. My foot can waltz perfectly well. I've seen you practicing in the music room when you thought no one was watching. His eyes held challenge and something gentler beneath it. Trust me. I won't let you fall. She stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that every eye in the ballroom would be upon them, knowing her mother was somewhere in this crowd, watching, waiting for her to fail. She took his hand. The waltz was slower than usual, Theron adjusting his pace to accommodate her stride without making it obvious. His hand at her waist was steady and sure, guiding her through the turns with quiet competence. And somehow, impossibly, Corisande found herself dancing without stumbling, without shame, without the burning humiliation she'd always imagined. You're doing beautifully, Theron murmured. You're an excellent lead. I'm a duke. Excellence is rather expected. But he was smiling, that rare, genuine expression that softened his stern features. When the music ended, applause rippled through the ballroom. Corisande was breathless, not from exertion, but from the realization of what they'd just accomplished together. Later, in the carriage home, Sophronia declared the evening a triumph. Theron remained quiet, but his gaze kept returning to Corisande with an expression she couldn't decipher. And Corisande herself sat in silence, trying to ignore the dangerous truth taking root in her chest. She was beginning to feel something for him, something that had nothing to do with arrangement or obligation, something that could destroy her if she let it. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm Corisande had never anticipated. Mornings found her in Thornfield House's magnificent library, surrounded by philosophical texts that Theron had begun quietly placing on tables where she would find them, unmarked, but clearly selected with her interests in mind. Afternoons brought social calls, carefully orchestrated appearances designed to cement their engagement in society's collective mind. And evenings had become something unexpected. It started with dinners, formal affairs with Sophronia presiding, but gradually the Dowager Duchess began excusing herself earlier and earlier, leaving Corisande and Theron alone with their wine and increasingly lengthy conversations. You're not what I expected, Theron said one night, 3 weeks into their arrangement. They'd retreated to the library after dinner, a habit that had developed without either of them acknowledging it. What did you expect? Someone bitter, angry at the world for dealing her an unfair hand. He swirled his whiskey thoughtfully. Instead, you're devastatingly charming, intellectually superior, humble beyond measure. He laughed, a low, genuine sound that she was learning to treasure. I was going to say resilient, though the sarcasm is certainly notable. Sarcasm is the armor of the wounded, Your Grace. Theron, he corrected for the 100th time. And I know something about armor. I've worn my own for years. She looked at him then. Really looked, seeing past the ducal reserve to something more vulnerable beneath. What wounded you? The question hung between them. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. My father, he said finally. He was exacting. Nothing was ever good enough. I could ride better than any boy in the county, and he'd criticize my form. I graduated Cambridge with highest honors, and he noted I hadn't made the connections he'd hoped for. When he died, I thought I'd finally be free of his voice in my head. Theron's jaw tightened. I wasn't. So you built walls, pushed everyone away before they could find you lacking. Grandmother's analysis precisely. She's been trying to breach those walls for a decade. And has she succeeded? His eyes met hers, gray and deep and suddenly unguarded. Not until recently. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Corisande broke eye contact first, reaching for her wine with hands that trembled slightly. We should be careful, she said softly, echoing her own warning from weeks ago. Yes, Theron agreed. We should. Neither moved. The vulnerable moments multiplied after that night. Small gestures accumulated like snow, each one insignificant alone, but together forming something substantial. Theron began walking with her in the mornings, matching his pace to hers without comment, his hand ready at her elbow when the cobblestones grew uneven. He noticed when she grew tired at social functions and manufactured reasons to leave early. He remembered that she disliked oysters and loved marzipan and found poetry tedious, but adored astronomical charts. And Coruscant, despite her best intentions, noticed everything about him. The way he rubbed the bridge of his nose when frustrated with correspondence, his habit of reading philosophy before bed, dog-earing pages he wanted to discuss with her, the surprising gentleness with which he treated servants, a stark contrast to his cold public demeanor. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, sitting alone on a bench with an expression of such profound sadness that her heart clenched. "Theron?" He looked up, quickly composing his features. "Coruscant, I didn't hear you approach. What's wrong?" "Nothing. Estate business." She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You're a terrible liar for a duke." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "It's the anniversary of my mother's death. She passed when I was 12. Father forbade us from speaking of her afterward. Said grief was weakness. Grief is love with nowhere to go," Coruscant said quietly. "My grandmother told me that once, before she died. It's not weakness. It's proof that something mattered." Theron was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand in his. His fingers were warm, his grip careful, as if she were something precious. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, neither speaking, neither needing to. And Coruscant felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. She was falling in love with him. Not the Duke of Thornfield with his title and wealth, but Theron, the wounded man beneath the armor who was learning to let her see him. It was wonderful. It was terrifying. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The confrontation came 6 weeks into their engagement, with only 2 weeks remaining until the wedding. Coruscant was in her sitting room, reviewing the final seating arrangements Sophronia had prepared, when Theron appeared in the doorway. His expression was strange, conflicted in a way she'd learned to recognize. "We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. "That's never a promising beginning." He closed the door behind him, a breach of propriety that would have scandalized anyone watching. "I've been trying to find the right words for days. There aren't any, so I'm simply going to say it. Theron, I don't want this to be an arrangement anymore." The words hit her like a physical blow. Of course, he'd realized the truth, that she wasn't worth the trouble, that her parents were right all along. "I understand," she replied quietly. "I'll speak to your grandmother about ending things quietly." "No." He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his with an urgency that startled her. "You misunderstand. I don't want to end anything. I want to make it real." Coruscant stared at him. "I've spent 6 weeks watching you navigate a world that tried to break you," Theron continued, the words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back for too long. "I've watched you charm hostile strangers and debate philosophy and dance despite being told your entire life that you couldn't. I've watched you show kindness to servants and patience with my grandmother's meddling and grace under pressure that puts every aristocrat I know to shame. Theron, I'm falling in love with you." His gray eyes blazed with intensity. "Not because of any arrangement. Not because my grandmother manipulated us into this. Because you're extraordinary, Coruscant. Because you make me laugh and think and feel things I'd convinced myself I wasn't capable of feeling." Tears pricked at her eyes. "You can't mean that." "I've never meant anything more. But I'm—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at her foot, at everything she'd been taught to hate about her own existence. "You're a duke. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want you." His hands tightened on hers. "Marry me. Not because we announced it to society. Not because backing out would cause scandal. Marry me because I love you, and I believe, I hope, that you might feel something for me too." The hope in his voice, raw and vulnerable, nearly undid her. But fear was a powerful thing, bred into her bones, over 23 years of being told she was worthless. And it rose up now, choking her, whispering all the reasons this couldn't possibly be real. "I can't," she whispered. Theron's face went pale. "Coruscant, I want to say yes. God, I want to." The tears spilled over, trailing down her cheeks. "But how can I trust this? How can I know it's real and not just proximity and pretense and two lonely people convincing themselves they've found something? Because I know what I feel, and I don't know what I feel." The lie burned on her tongue, because she did know. She loved him with a desperation that terrified her. "I need time. I need to be certain. If we do this, if we make it real, I need to know it won't destroy me when you realize you've made a mistake." The pain on his face was almost unbearable to witness. "How long?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. After the wedding. Give me time to understand my own heart without the pressure of society watching." It was cowardice dressed as wisdom, and they both knew it. But Theron, because he was Theron, nodded slowly. "After the wedding, then. We'll marry as planned, and afterward." He released her hands gently, stepping back. "Afterward, we'll find our way, however long it takes." He left without another word, and Coruscant sank into her chair, weeping for what she wanted and was too afraid to take. 3 days before the wedding, catastrophe arrived in the form of Lady Millicent Graves. Coruscant was taking tea with Sophronia when the butler announced an unexpected visitor. Millicent swept in before she could be refused, her smile sharp as a knife's edge. "Dowager Duchess, Lady Coruscant, how lovely to find you both here." "Lady Millicent." Sophronia's tone could have frozen the Thames. "I don't recall extending an invitation." "Some news is too important to wait for invitations." Millicent settled uninvited into a chair, arranging her skirts with theatrical precision. "I've been doing some investigating, you see. The sudden engagement of the reclusive Duke to a woman no one had ever heard of. It seemed so convenient." Coruscant's blood ran cold. "I found the most interesting things," Millicent continued. "Servants who heard the announcement before any courtship had occurred. Witnesses who saw you, Dowager Duchess, practically dragging Lady Coruscant across the Hartwell ballroom. And of course, Lady Coruscant's own parents, who were quite willing to share how surprised they were by the engagement, given that their daughter had never once mentioned knowing the Duke." "What exactly are you implying?" Sophronia's voice was deadly quiet. "I'm implying that this engagement is a fraud, a scheme concocted by you to force your grandson into marriage with a crippled nobody desperate enough to participate in the deception." Millicent's eyes glittered with triumph. "The question is, what would society say if they knew?" Silence crashed through the room. "You have no proof," Coruscant said, keeping her voice level. "I have enough to raise questions that will follow you both forever. The Duke who was tricked into marriage, the desperate spinster who schemed her way into a title." Millicent smiled, unless of course arrangements could be made. "Blackmail." Sophronia's lips thinned. How predictable. "Business," Millicent corrected. "I want the Duke. I've wanted him for years, and I refuse to lose him to some broken creature his grandmother dredged up from obscurity. Call off the wedding, and this stays between us. Proceed, and I'll ensure every drawing room in London knows the truth by week's end." She rose, smoothing her gloves. You have until tomorrow evening to decide." After she left, the silence stretched unbearably. "She'll do it," Corisanda said finally. "She'll destroy everything." "Let her try." Sophronia's eyes blazed with fury. "That woman has no idea who she's dealing with." "But she's right, isn't she, about how this started? If she tells people—" "She tells people what? That I introduced my grandson to a remarkable woman at a ball? That I encouraged a match I believed would benefit them both?" Sophronia gripped Corisanda's hands firmly. "The truth of how something begins matters far less than the truth of what it becomes." "Do you love my grandson?" The question demanded honesty. "Yes," Corisanda whispered. "God help me." "Yes." "Then fight for him. Don't let that poisonous creature take your happiness, because she's convinced you don't deserve it." Corisand found Theron in his study that evening, staring into the fireplace, with a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. "You've heard," she said from the doorway. "Grandmother told me." He didn't turn around. "Lady Millicent has always been persistent. I never imagined she'd resort to blackmail." "If we call off the wedding?" "No." Now he turned, and the fire in his eyes matched the flames behind him. "I won't give her that satisfaction. I won't give anyone that power over my life. Not anymore. But the scandal? Let there be scandal." He crossed to her, taking her hands with the same urgency as before. "Let them whisper and speculate and draw whatever conclusions they want. I know the truth. The truth is that I love you, Corisand. The truth is that however this began, what we have now is real. Theron, you asked for time. I gave it to you. But I'm asking now, directly, without pretense or arrangement, or any consideration except what's in your heart." His voice cracked slightly. "Do you love me?" She looked at him, this man who had seen past her limp to the person beneath, who had held her hand in a garden and shared his grief and learned her preferences and defended her against the cruelty of a world that had never shown her kindness. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there, a scar left by years of being told she was worthless. But love was there too, stronger than fear, brighter than doubt. "Yes," she said. "I love you. I've loved you for weeks. I was just too afraid to believe I deserved it." "You deserve everything." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "You deserve joy and respect, and someone who sees how extraordinary you are. Let me be that someone. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that your parents were wrong about everything. And Lady Millicent, we'll face her together. Whatever she says, whatever anyone says, we face it as partners." His forehead rested against hers. "Marry me, Corisand. Not in 3 days because it was announced. Marry me because we choose each other." She pulled back just far enough to look into his eyes. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes." When he kissed her, it was nothing like the chaste pecks they'd exchanged for public consumption. This was desperate and tender and achingly honest, a promise sealed without words. And Corisand, for the first time in her life, believed she might actually be worthy of happiness. The wedding took place on a crisp autumn morning at Thornfield Cathedral. Lady Millicent had followed through on her threats, and whispers rippled through the gathered guests about arrangements and schemes and questions of legitimacy. None of it mattered. Corisand walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, her limp visible and unashamed. She'd refused the specially constructed shoes that minimized her gait. This was who she was, and the man waiting at the altar loved her exactly as she came. Theron's face when he saw her was something she would remember forever. Awe and love and fierce pride, all written plainly for anyone to see. Her parents sat in the third row, their expressions carefully neutral. They'd come because refusing would have caused more gossip than attending. Corisanda didn't spare them more than a glance. Perpetua, however, was weeping happy tears in the front row, clutching a handkerchief and smiling through her sobs. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and rings and the profound weight of promises made. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, and Theron kissed her before God and the gathered witnesses, Corisande felt something fundamental shift in her universe. She was no longer the shameful daughter hidden in alcoves. She was the Duchess of Thornfield. At the wedding breakfast, Theron pulled her aside with barely concealed excitement. "I have something for you." "Another gift? You've already been absurdly generous. This one is different." He pressed a folded document into her hands. "Open it." Corisande unfolded the papers and read, her eyes widening with each line. It was a trust, establishing a substantial independent income for her sister Perpetua, along with a townhouse in London and funds for a proper season. "Your sister's future is secure," Theron said quietly. "Regardless of your parents' schemes or financial difficulties, she'll have choices they never gave you." "Theron, this is—" She couldn't find adequate words. "It's also not the end." He produced another document. "This establishes a charitable foundation in your name for young women with physical differences, education, support, opportunities that society typically denies them. You'll oversee it entirely." Tears streamed down her face. "Why?" "Because you spent 23 years being told you were worthless, and I want you to spend the rest of your life proving that every child like you has value." He wiped her tears with gentle fingers. "Because I love you, and this is how I show it." She kissed him then, in full view of the wedding guests, with a passion that was entirely improper and absolutely perfect. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I know." His smile was radiant. "And I intend to spend every day earning that love." 5 years later. The nursery at Thornfield Manor was alive with delightful chaos. Corisanda watched from the doorway as Theron attempted to wrangle their twins, 3-year-old Matthias and his sister Rosalind, both of whom had inherited their father's stubborn streak and their mother's sharp wit. "Papa, watch me!" Rosalind commanded, attempting a wobbly curtsy that ended with her sitting firmly on the carpet. "Magnificent," Theron declared solemnly. "The most elegant curtsy I've ever witnessed." "I can do better," Matthias insisted, launching himself at his father's legs with the clear intention of proving something. The result was Theron toppling backward onto a pile of cushions, while both children shrieked with laughter. "Need reinforcements?" Corisanda asked, stepping into the room. "I believe I'm being ambushed," Theron replied from beneath the giggling pile. "This is mutiny of the highest order. They learned from watching you negotiate with Parliament. All strategy, no mercy." She helped extract him from the twin assault, and they stood together, watching their children race around the nursery with inexhaustible energy. "I received a letter from Perpetua today," Corisanda mentioned. "She's accepted Lord Whitmore's proposal." "The naval officer? The one who looked at her like she hung the moon?" "The very same. She's genuinely happy, Theron. She chose him herself, without pressure or financial desperation, because she wanted to. As it should be." He slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Speaking of letters, I had one from my solicitor. Lady Millicent has left England. Apparently, her reputation never quite recovered from her blackmail attempt becoming public knowledge. How unfortunate for her. Tragic, really." His tone held not a shred of sympathy. Corisande leaned into him, watching their children play. Rosalind had inherited her mother's foot, the same slight twist that had marked Corisande as unfit for so many years. But Rosalind would never know the shame Corisande had carried. She would grow up knowing she was loved, valued, and perfect exactly as she was. "Do you ever think about how this started?" she asked quietly. "Your grandmother ambushing me at a ball and announcing an engagement I knew nothing about? I prefer to call it aggressive matchmaking. I prefer to call it successful manipulation." But Theron was smiling. "And yes, I think about it. I think about how close I came to missing this because I was too proud to see what she saw." Which was? That the broken girl hiding in alcoves and the lonely duke hiding behind walls might just be exactly what each other needed. He turned her to face him, his gray eyes soft with love. "You saved me, Coruscant. You made me believe that connection was possible, that I deserved happiness, despite the voice in my head insisting I didn't." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's how the best partnerships work." "Mama! Papa! Watch!" The twins had constructed an elaborate tower of blocks that looked structurally unsound and absolutely certain to collapse. "It's going to fall," Theron predicted. "Obviously. But they'll learn. From failure. From trying." Coruscant smiled up at him. "The most important things don't come from getting it right the first time. They come from being brave enough to try again." The tower collapsed. The twins shrieked with delight rather than disappointment, and immediately began rebuilding. "Wise woman, my wife," Theron murmured. "I had excellent teachers. Your grandmother, for one." Heaven help us all. They stood together in the nursery doorway, watching their children create chaos and joy in equal measure. Outside, the Thornfield Gardens bloomed with late summer flowers. Somewhere in London, Perpetua was planning her wedding to a man who adored her. And in a modest cottage on the far edge of the Ashworth estate, Lord and Lady Ashworth lived in genteel obscurity, their social standing never having recovered from the scandal of their treatment of their eldest daughter becoming public knowledge. Karma, Coruscant reflected, had a beautiful sense of timing. "Happy?" Theron asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. She considered the question seriously, as she considered all questions. She thought of the girl she'd been, hiding behind curtains, believing herself worthless. She thought of the woman she'd become, a duchess, a mother, a philanthropist, whose foundation had helped hundreds of young women with physical differences find education and opportunity. She thought of Theron, her partner, her love, the man who had seen her when no one else bothered to look. Completely, she said, unreservedly, impossibly happy. "Good." He pulled her closer as another block tower crashed gloriously to the ground. "Because I intend to keep you that way for the rest of our lives." It had started with manipulation and desperation, a scheme by a meddling grandmother and a trapped woman with no options. It had become something far more precious. It had become love. Thank you for listening until the very end of this journey. If this story touched your heart, made you believe in second chances, or reminded you that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, please like, comment, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your support keeps our storytelling family growing. Stay tuned. Another tale of love and redemption awaits you at the end of this video. From all of us, thank you for being here.